When everything becomes cheap enough to win, no one really wins. For years, China's rise felt unstoppable. They called it the factory of the world, and it wasn't for nothing. Cities that never slept, assembly lines glowing through the night, prices dropping like clockwork year after year. And at some point, Western competitors said, okay, we can't keep up. It was a miracle of scale, discipline, and planning, a civilization turning human labor into economic horsepower. But every miracle has a cost. China's greatest advantage, the ability to produce everything cheaper, faster, and at massive scale, has now become the very force pulling it down. Welcome to the economic historian. You're at the intersection of money, power, and history. And here, nothing is ever as simple as it looks. China's story is the story of modern capitalism stretched to the breaking point, a system that worships growth above all else, even when the price is consuming tomorrow. So what happens when the world's largest production machine optimizes itself into exhaustion? When efficiency becomes self-destruction? To understand that, we have to go back to where China's miracle began. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping stood before the Communist Party and shattered one of socialism's biggest taboos. He told China, "Getting rich is not shameful. In fact, it was patriotic." And with that sentence, one of the fastest economic transformations in world history began. Overnight, peasants became entrepreneurs. The countryside turned into factories. Foreign investors, first Japan, then the United States, then Europe, saw massive opportunity. Cheap labor, endless manpower, and a state ready to make deals. China opened special economic zones, small test cities, where the rules were different. No central planning, no heavy bureaucracy, no ideological rigidity. One goal: let capital in, push exports out. And let's be honest, that plan worked too well. Shenzhen, a quiet fishing town of 30,000, turned into a megacity of millions in just a few decades. And then that formula spread nationwide. Every province wanted its own leap. Every city wanted to become the next Shenzhen. The result? Local governments borrowed. Highways, power plants, industrial zones. Everything was built to attract more factories. By the early 2000s, China wasn't just growing. It was devouring global demand: steel, coal, copper, oil. Western companies that wanted to survive shifted production there. If something could be made, it eventually started being made in China. But beneath that rise was a dangerously powerful incentive. Success meant producing cheaper than everyone else. Local governments cheapened land, cut taxes, suppressed wages to pull in factories. Companies, just to survive, crushed their profit margins, started cutting quality, and sacrificed profit. Everyone chased growth. No one chased sustainability. It was a race to the bottom, disguised as progress. For a while, nobody cared, because the machine was too powerful. A flood of workers poured from the countryside into cities, millions every year, willing to work 12-hour days for far less than Western wages. Factories never stopped, ports never slept, and Western consumers got their miracle: cheap t-shirts, cheap electronics, and the feeling of abundance without inflation. The result? China got rich. But at some point, the system began to overheat. The miracle slowly turned into an addiction. Local governments became dependent on growth just to roll over their debt. So instead of braking, they hit the gas. More factories, more infrastructure, more projects. By 2015, China's steel capacity alone had surpassed the rest of the world. Massive industrial zones were pumping out production faster than the world could absorb, and prices began to fall, not from innovation, but from desperation. And the most critical thing was this: when profits fell, factories didn't slow down. They sped up. Volume will save us, they said. It didn't. Right here, a new word entered the story, a word originally used for human life, but now describing the economy, involution. Involution isn't just people working more and earning less. It's companies producing more and earning less. It's competition turning from innovation into a fight to survive. In the past, involution described students or workers in China exhausting themselves for shrinking rewards. Now the problem is industrial, systemic. An entire sector locked into a zero-sum war for market share. With only one weapon left: price. Solar panels, electric vehicles, batteries. The showroom of China's new economy suddenly became a battlefield. Dozens of state-backed firms flooded the market with copycat products. Everyone cut prices to stay alive. Everyone else matched them. Profit margins collapsed, but no one could hit the brakes. Because in a system where output is treated as success, cutting production isn't just lost income, it's lost face. And this is how the loop feeds itself. Cut price, hold market share, rivals cut too, profits collapse, but production doesn't stop. Consumers cheer for a while. Great, it's cheaper. Then they slowly realize the cost of cheap abundance is prosperity. China is now in an era of industrial involution. Efficiency is eating profit and production is eating its purpose. This is no longer a race to innovate, it's a race to the bottom. And in races to the bottom, no one wins. And the irony is, China has been here before. In the 2000s, overproduction in coal and steel pushed prices to the floor, and Beijing had to step in. It cut capacity by force, closed mines, merged plants, laid off hundreds of thousands. Economic triage. Short-term pain was accepted, because the goal was to prevent total collapse. Today the same movie is playing again. But this time it's not one sector. This time the problem is the growth model itself. Factories don't close because logic says so. In China, factories close when politics allows it. And in China, politics doesn't reward contraction. It rewards motion, even if that motion is running in circles. Behind closed doors, party officials know the numbers like everyone else: falling profits, stagnant wages, swelling debt. But the public message doesn't change. Produce, grow, keep going. Because if the machine stops, the illusion stops. By the 2020s, China's efficiency machine had turned into something else entirely. An arms race against itself. From the outside, it still looked like victory. Record exports, enormous factories, solar panels flowing non-stop. But inside, profit margins were bleeding away. The miracle wasn't creating new wealth anymore. It was just circulating what existed faster in a thinner layer each year. Economists have a word for this: overcapacity. But in China, overcapacity is often not a mistake. It's policy. Look at solar. In 2023, China produced more than twice the world's total demand. Prices fell nearly 40% in a single year. Companies went below cost just to clear inventory. Smaller players couldn't survive and shut down one by one. But the giants kept producing because local governments want jobs, they want numbers, and they want the image of progress. Now look at electric vehicles. In China, more than 100 domestic EV brands are fighting for the same market. Each cuts prices to stay alive. One company's discount becomes an almost mandatory response for the others. Competition stops being about technological edge and turns into pure survival. At that point, the state steps in with subsidies to slow the bankruptcy wave and to prevent mass layoffs. But as support arrives, the wheel spins faster. Companies keep producing instead of cutting back. Supply swells further. Prices drop a bit more. And what remains is thinner profit margins shared by everyone. Where this goes isn't hard to guess. In the first half of 2024, China's industrial profits fell by more than 20%, and that's despite exports staying strong. Factories are pushing out more goods than ever, but earning less from each one. On paper, the economy is still growing, but the inside of that growth is hollowing out. But here's the real twist. Not all of this is a mistake. Some of it is strategy. China has long understood the game of weaponized efficiency. Keep key sectors alive with subsidies, accept short-term losses, squeeze rivals with price until they're pushed aside, then dominate the market. This isn't about quarterly profit. This is about strategic advantage to even strategic monopoly. Solar panels, batteries, electric vehicles. These are the infrastructure of the 21st century. Beijing doesn't mind losing money in the short run because the point isn't today's profit. It's control of the future. It wants to erase rivals and then write the rules afterward. But this game has a limit, and that limit begins at home. Because domination built on losses cannot last forever. Even strategically, there is a limit to how long an empire can keep bleeding money. Once every sector starts believing the state will save us anyway, companies compete not through innovation, but through subsidies. Efficiency turns into politics. The line between national strategy and national burden begins to blur. This is the hidden danger behind China's price wars. These are not just economic wars, they are fiscal time bombs. Every factory you keep alive today borrows from tomorrow. One day, that bill comes due. And this is exactly where the tragedy of the China trap lies. The same mechanism that carried China to the top is now consuming it from within. Because domination through losses is not victory, it's deferred collapse. What kills an empire is not the collapse of demand, it's the collapse of purpose. And here, purpose has been replaced by momentum, a system that cannot slow down. Because every layer depends on movement. Local governments demand production to service debt. Banks demand lending to justify balance sheets. The center demands the wheel keep turning to sustain the illusion of employment. If one link in the chain stops, everything shakes. So everyone keeps selling the story. More production equals more prosperity. Even when it's no longer true. The political logic of state capitalism works roughly like this. Production is the most concrete way of saying we're in control. When growth slows, the state doesn't step aside. It builds another factory. When prices fall, it doesn't say stop. It pushes them lower. When the private sector hesitates, local governments step in with more credit. The cure for every imbalance becomes more of the same imbalance. This isn't irrational, it's survival. Because China's economy isn't just a motor that generates money, it's also a motor that carries political legitimacy. And the social contract really has one clause. Let growth continue. Let people keep believing. That worked when growth put more money in people's pockets. But when growth only means cheaper products, it doesn't produce the same effect. The paradox shows no mercy. China's overproduction keeps global prices low. But inside China, it also keeps wages and demand low. The country that lifted millions out of poverty now struggles to raise living standards for those it already lifted. And as China exports deflation to the world, the global system becomes more fragile. Factories in the West can't survive this race. Emerging economies can't even find the space to build their own industries. The bill that cheap sends to the world is stagnation. This trap isn't new. China didn't invent it. History did. Of course, this wasn't the only cause, but it was one of the mechanisms that broke the balance. Britain lived it in coal. It produced so much and pushed so much onto the market that prices collapsed. At a certain point, even British miners couldn't survive on it. Japan's miracle in the 1980s hit a similar wall. Capacity grew, production grew, but demand didn't arrive at the same speed, and it turned into deflation. Then the population aged, people cut spending. The machine kept running, but the fuel started running out. Rome's story doesn't begin with, one day the barbarians came and everything ended. It begins from inside, from a quieter place. As grain flowed like a flood from vast estates and cheap labor, prices fell. Small farmers couldn't survive and collapsed. The backbone broke. Rome fed itself and broke its own balance in the process. Every empire that perfects efficiency eventually faces the same question. Can you stop optimizing long enough to survive? China knows this, which is why it talks about rebalancing, shifting from investment-led growth to consumption. But that takes time, and time is the one thing growth-addicted systems have the least of. Beijing is trying to steer toward consumption and innovation, but provinces are still saying one more factory, a bit more infrastructure, a bit more output. Because the incentive system that drives them is still the same, it's like saying, I'm saving water, while the tap is wide open. And the irony is this: the very products China is overproducing, solar panels, batteries, EVs, are truly necessary for the world's energy transition. But when prices collapse and firms fail, even that transition can slow. The world gets cheaper technology. China pays the price in profitability. Cheap abundance eventually turns into a trap. Because the issue isn't only producing wealth, it's also the slow death of the desire to produce. And when that desire fades, efficiency stops being something we praise and becomes something that weighs on you. China's problem isn't too little productivity, it's too much productivity. A system that perfected production but lost balance. An empire that can flood the world with goods, yet cannot generate the demand required to make it profitable. And history's cruel lesson is this: the cost of being too cheap is the most expensive cost of all. Because when a system optimizes everything except balance, eventually, the only thing left it can destroy is itself. If this narrative shifted your perspective even a little, subscribe. Because here we don't just list events, we examine the forces behind them. History is quiet, but it's full of answers. What matters is knowing where to look. And on this channel, that's exactly what we do.